OK, so, Rafe, we had all the details overnight. Quite exciting. Bit of controversy, though. So should we start off with the shortened route? I mean, what's that about?
Yes, so as you said, it's around a quarter of the length of the Queen's, 1.5 miles. The King's just going to go down the Mall in front of Buckingham Palace, into Trafalgar Square, turn right down Whitehall into Parliament Square, basically the same route as the state opening of Parliament. They're saying it's been done because of familial reasons, but very familiar route. There's also, of course, the issue that we simply don't have the armed forces strength that we used to have back in 1953. So in 1953, you had around 30,000 troops involved in some capacity, 12,000 of them in the procession. But the armed forces we had back then numbered almost 900,000 in 1953. Today, it's barely 200,000. So we're only going to have around 3,000 troops involved in the coronation. There'll be several hundred in this procession as well. So you have to bear that in mind. And also, of course, the King and the Queen are considerably older than the 25-year-old Queen Elizabeth II was in 1953. We know that the King and the Queen have back problems, back pain. Now, that hasn't been confirmed as a reason for shortening this, but it's interesting to note that with a break with tradition, they're going to be using 2 coaches on this occasion. The gold state coach is normally used both ways, but it's a notorious bone shaker, and it also sways from side to side. You know, King William IV said it was like being on a ship in rough seas. The Queen Victoria was horrified by its oscillation, and the Queen herself, Elizabeth II, said it was horrible. And so that's not a real journey when you're in your 70s you want to be taken, given it's got 18th century suspension with leather straps on it. So they're going to be taking the much nicer, modern 2012 Diamond Jubilee state carriage, which has hydraulic suspension and stabilizers, air conditioning, heating, and electric windows even in the body of a wonderful 18th century style carriage. So they'll be travelling in some comfort there, and on the journey back it'll be in the old bone shaker.
Rafe, does King Charles, is he slightly concerned about being seen to be too decadent, particularly during a cost of living crisis, but also because younger generations aren't as pro-monarchy as others? Is he concerned about that sort of thing? Could that have something to do with the short length of the procession, for example?
I'm not sure whether that's really the reason for the procession itself, although you make a very good point about the broader issue surrounding the coronation. The decision, for example, not to have peers appearing in their grand coronation robes, for example. No coronets are being used. So there is a sense to modernise the monarchy on the one hand, but also in this cost of living era to have a cost of living coronation. Speaking personally, I think that's a bit of a shame. It's at times like these that we need occasions of great pomp and pageantry to actually lift the spirits. We have to remember in 1953, Britain was living through a period where we still had rationing, and yet that was probably the most opulent and decadent of all coronations. And indeed, when the Queen got married in 1947, heavy rationing was in place then, and women were cutting out their own ration coupons for clothing to give to the Queen so she could have, to the Princess Elizabeth rather at the time, to have her wedding dress. So actually, I think, we need to ensure that we do maintain some semblance of tradition. I mean, nothing could be more opulent than having a 4-ton gold state coach, I think.
Well, quite.
Who doesn't have one of those in the garage at home? Rafe, but I mean, that's a really good point, isn't it? I mean, there are pictures and pages in all the newspapers today of the crown jewels in all their glory they're going to be used. I mean, the crowns, 2 crowns that Charles is going to use, the crown Camilla's going to use. And it's very controversial. It's the ivory sceptre, isn't it, that people are getting their nicks in a twist about because it's ivory. And Charles is a big conservation campaigner, isn't he? So should Camilla use the ivory? Shouldn't she use the ivory? What do we reckon to that one?
Of course she should. I mean, absolutely. I think it's essential. I'm still getting over the fact that we're not going to have the Kohinoor diamond in the crown worn by the Queen at her coronation. That was a gesture towards understanding the history behind the Kohinoor, and there were protests from India about that. And some people did think that for very much the same reason there would be a decision not to use the ivory scepter, particularly because Prince William has been campaigning on the illegal trade in ivory for years. He's been president since 2005 of the Tusk Trust, which actually is centered upon this very issue. And he's reported to have said that he wants to have all of the ivory at Buckingham Palace destroyed in order to set an example. But I think the palace understands quite rightly that there's a difference between historic ivory and the modern trade in ivory. There are wonderful, glorious items in the royal collection which are of great historic importance, and it will be a great shame not to use them. One of these is the ivory scepter. It's called the Rod with Dove. The Queen will have two scepters, one representing temporal power, one representing spiritual power, echoing the two that the King will have. And this is a wonderful 3-foot-long ivory scepter made in 1685 for Queen Mary of Modena, the wife of James II at her coronation, and it's been used by every Queen consort since then. So it's only right that it should continue to be used now.
Well, there you go. We shouldn't have to give up everything traditional just because a few activists are getting their knickers in a twist, as you said.
I think I love the pomp and ceremony, and surely it's going to be good for tourism. But obviously the burning question, and I don't want to drag the conversation down to their level, but do we know yet if a certain Harry and Meghan will be popping over?
Who's that? Harry and Meghan? I'm not sure.
Yeah, a couple from California, evidently.
Look, I mean, this is the greatest who they and will they and won't they. I said yesterday that they seem to be confusing the coronation for Coronation Street. They're turning what is the greatest ceremonial and constitutional event we have, the first one for 70 years, into a soap opera. And it's a needless distraction, actually, to have this constant focus on them. They need to make a public statement. We know, for example, about every other dignitary who's coming, all the presidents and kings, and they have far more busy schedules. We're told that Prince Harry's been having lengthy discussions with the palace behind the scenes. Well, why do you need lengthy discussions? You work 1 hour a week, apparently, according to sources. It's not like you have a busy schedule. Just get on a plane, go into the Abbey, sit down and leave. I mean, it's not a complicated scenario. Let's have an end to all of this.
I mean, Rafe, if he can come to London, if he can jet to London to appear in a court, then I think he could make it to the coronation of his father. You would have thought, but I guess he wants to keep us all on a knife edge, Dawn.